work that defines how we decide that someone should receive international protection. Like, how do we qualify these persons as refugees or beneficiaries of subsidiary protection, which is another form of international protection, through what procedures and what reception conditions European member states should be offering these people. So where these people should live, should they be able to work, etc., while awaiting for the result in their asylum applications. Another thing that you should know is that the EU is obsessed with externalization. So what defines what is in the core of the migration policies in the EU is how to push the obligations for migration and refugee management farther and farther away. So, for starters, at the periphery of the EU, Spain is also a great example, Greece obviously, but then also to their islands, and then outside the EU, to the neighboring countries, and even further if this is possible. This being said, we understand that there is very little solidarity between member states, and in general, the approach of the EU to migration crisis, as it's very often referred to, is usually characterized by a lack of preparedness, and it's a patchwork approach. So I would say, I also wanted to repeat what Anna just said. I would love it if you would ask me questions, otherwise I'll start feeling very lonely. And I think it's also a bit of a heavy presentation with a lot of information. I think a lot of this information you might also find online, but I think the added value of being here is you can feel free to ask me questions at any moment. Also, as a disclaimer, the information that is used in the presentation is based on the experience that I personally have had and my organization, the colleagues, on the island of Lesvos, mostly where I used to work for 6 years, now in Athens. Yeah, I've tried to gather what we have defined, what we have identified as some of the most key moments of the migration issues in Greece since 2015 up to now, and how these have defined also the Common European Asylum System that I mentioned before, and its reform that is actually taking place as we speak. So, I can do this, I think it's going to be better. I decided to start the presentation from the moment of the EU-Turkey statement, so I will explain a little bit what I'm talking about with this. Yeah. So, actually, the correct term is Turkey. This is the official name of Turkey nowadays. So, the EU-Turkey statement took place on the 18th of March 2016. Just to refresh your memory, you might remember that throughout 2015, it is estimated that more than 1 million people crossed to Europe from Greece. Although, as I had said before, the main EU migration policy is that countries at the periphery are responsible for migration management, and hence every asylum seeker that manages to arrive to another country will be returned to the countries of first entry. During 2015, that was set aside because the influx was immense. So people were somehow, were somehow able to get to the country of their desired country of destination, which usually was Germany or Austria. However, this started gradually changing by the end of 2015, starting from the northern countries, from Germany, and then having a domino effect all the way to the Balkan countries, that they gradually decided they wanted to stop allowing refugees to pass through their borders. So this led to what we refer to as the closure of the Balkan route in March 2016. I was working back then already. I was on the island of Samos, and I can tell you it didn't exactly happen from one day to another, but it was gradually happening from December 2015 different countries were closing their borders or allowing specific nationalities only to cross until they completely closed their borders in March 2016. This meant that all these refugees that were already in Greece and trying to move forward to their country of destination were stranded in Greece. Because of this situation, and as a way for the EU to help Greece face this issue, there was an agreement between EU and Turkey that provided for different obligations, but I will only focus on some of them, and the rest you can see at the presentation whenever you have the time. So the main points for us was that A, all new irregular migrants or asylum seekers whose applications had been rejected were to return to Turkey, but Turkey would be obliged to take them back, but also people whose asylum applications were found inadmissible. This means that Turkey had committed to taking back also people whose applications were not rejected because they were not considered to be real refugees, but for whom Greece considered that they could just go and seek asylum in Turkey instead, regardless of whether they should be recognized as refugees or not. Still, for some people, Greece would consider that these people can go to Turkey and ask for asylum there. This is what we call the safe third country concept, and I will elaborate on this a bit later. So part of this agreement was that Turkey would take back everyone who was rejected in Greece, and also the ones that were found inadmissible. Obviously, this agreement was limited to people that were crossing from Turkey to the Greek islands, not the ones that were coming from the land border in the north. Turkey also agreed to stem the crossing, the arrivals to Greece. So the idea was that Turkey would try to keep people within its territory and not allow them to cross to Greece. And for that, Turkey would receive money from the EU, as well as there was a resettlement program that was to put in place that for every Syrian refugee that Greece would send back, the EU would take one Syrian refugee from Greece. That was a bit of a joke back then, and there were a lot of memes on Facebook, like describing this in a circle, like we take one, we send that one back, and we take one more back from Turkey, and everybody was wondering how this makes any sense. But anyway, that was what the deal was about, and there were several other concessions to Turkey, such as money obviously was given, and there was a commitment that there would be visa liberalization for Turkish citizens and some other concessions. So the first effect of that policy was what we call, of that agreement, was what we call the containment policy. I'm not certain whether you have heard about this, but this is also a typical example of what we call externalization. As I mentioned before, the approach was not only to keep people at the external borders of the EU, but if possible, already at the most external part of these external countries, and that meant the containment policy, which meant keeping people on the Greek islands so that they cannot even move to the mainland of Greece. So how did that and does that work in practice? Because this policy still exists in Greece. Every person that would come to Greece after the EU-Turkey statement would to a Greek island, to the hotspot islands, as we used to name them, would have to stay on this island until the end of their asylum procedure. So they would come from Turkey to, let's say, Lesvos, Samos, Chios, Leros, and Kos, that were are the main islands of arrival, and people would have to stay there from the moment they would apply for asylum until the end, until they would be granted asylum or until they would be rejected and then they would be deported. That was the idea. And by deported, we mean sent back to Turkey, not to their country of origin. So this works with the imposition of a measure of geographical restriction. So every person that comes to a Greek island has a measure of geographical restriction imposed on them, which means that they cannot move forward to the mainland. Obviously, that led to the overcrowding of the Greek islands. You might remember photos of Moria camp in the press. I have included some as well to refresh your memory. And it actually still does. So we have overcrowding and inhuman and degrading conditions as a result of the containment policy. Also, to just mention that I think it's the case for borders in the whole world, not just in Greece, but usually services are lacking in borders. It's places with very few, or one hospital, very few ambulances, very few medical, specialized medical expertise. So in general, it's places already for nationals that don't offer enough service for the people living there, let alone for refugees. So I mentioned Moria before, but now these camps have been replaced with new camps. The new camps in Greece are called Closed Control Access Centers, CCACs. These camps are constructed with funding by the EU, but what we see is that the problems remain. We still have overcrowding. We still have a problem with the conditions. There is lack of water, heating, and air conditioning. Most of the information comes from the island of Samos, because it is very difficult for journalists to access the camps nowadays and document the situation. They're actually forbidden from doing so. Also, what we notice in the new camps is that they look like prisons. There is a carceral design. There is camera surveillance, which is not assessed as compliant with human rights safeguards. So basically, the digital rights of the people are violated in this case. There is a lot of work done on this as well. And entry and exit is only allowed between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. There is also literature and analysis by academia explaining why this model of camps could also be considered as detention because of all these restrictions. What has also happened lately is that in the end of 2022, the Greek authorities decided to close down the ESTIA program. Yes, the ESTIA program, which was the only non-urban accommodation for asylum seekers. So the idea is that all asylum seekers should be staying in camps and not in flats, regardless of their vulnerability and special needs. Why all this is problematic? Well, for many reasons, because we can see a lot of fundamental rights violations as a result of this, and I will elaborate more on this later, but also because the provision of dignified reception conditions, living conditions for asylum seekers is an obligation of the member states imposed on them by the EU legislation. So it's not just a matter for Greece alone, but it is a question for the Commission and the EU as a whole, like what to do when you have a member state that is not complying, not offering dignified reception conditions. Right, so that was Moria. These are just few of the photos. There are many more and much more graphic photos that I thought it wasn't a good idea to include. And that was Samos camp, Vathi hotspot in Samos. These are the previous camps. I'm going to give you an example. I can go a bit ahead to show you. Sorry, this is the new Samos camp. I mean, it's two different photos, but you can see the situation is not much better. There are no photos from Lesvos. As I said, it's very hard for journalists to go inside and document the situation. But I thought it was a good idea to actually talk a bit about one of our cases so you can understand what living in these camps meant for real people, for refugees, and what the impact of the containment policy was on refugees. So EF is one of our clients. She's actually my favorite one. She's a woman from Cameroon. She's a victim of torture, and she contracted HIV in Cameroon as a result of rape, and she was receiving in Cameroon antiretroviral treatment. When she came to Greece, and that was in December 2019, she arrived to the island of Lesvos. She was taken to Moria camp, the one that you saw before. And when she arrived, she was asymptomatic because she used to take her treatment when she was in her country of origin. So she was at the first stage of HIV, if you're familiar with the stages of the illness. So she had it under control. However, of course, she was subjected to the measure of geographical restriction, containment policy. She was not allowed to move from Lesvos to the Greek mainland. But in Lesvos, there was no antiretroviral treatment. This was in the knowledge of the authorities. She tried to explain this to the authorities in the camp and to the doctors multiple times, but there were 24,000 people in Moria back then in a camp for, let's say, approximately 3,000 people. There are different estimates about how many people could fit in that camp. So because of this, she did not receive antiretroviral treatment for actually 6 months, and that was only after multiple complaints that we submitted for her case, for her to be able to get out of the camp and access a hospital that would provide the necessary exams and the treatment. When she finally was able to access the treatment, and we were all very happy, just to say that obviously she was not seen by a doctor, and we were only able to speculate about where exactly she is in the scale of the HIV stages based on her symptoms, because we're not doctors. So we're looking at her symptoms and trying to explain through our complaints that her disease has been progressing very rapidly. So we were thinking, based on her symptoms, that she was either stage 2 or stage 3. Well, when she accessed treatment eventually, we found out that she was stage 4. So she was now at the last stage of HIV. She had developed AIDS. Also, she had developed, and this is actually from her medical file, an advanced HIV-related highly aggressive blood cancer, which then also spread to her cervix. That obviously put her life at risk. Her life is still at risk, actually, as we speak. We took the case to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights held that Greece is to pay a total of 10,000 euros. The sums of money that the court provides, yeah, Marta is laughing, are actually more symbolic than, I would say, just satisfaction, that, as it's been, as the court calls it. So this is one of our cases. We have a second one that is very similar. We're still awaiting a decision on that one. But then we also have SI versus Greece. So SI is an unaccompanied gay boy from Uganda who was also suffering from asthma. He came to Greece at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. Back then, Greece had decided to suspend access to asylum for a month. We can talk about this later. That was a wonderful unilateral decision that we never, ever, up to now, heard the European Commission actually criticizing in strong terms, but that's what it was. People could not apply for asylum. And SI was quarantined for more than 1 month next to the beach where he arrived in the open air, because they didn't want to bring him to the camp, A, because COVID, and they didn't want to be anywhere close to the child, and B, because they didn't know, the authorities didn't know what to do with these people, because access to asylum had been suspended. So should they be moved to the camp? Because the camp was only for asylum seekers, but they were not allowed to apply for asylum, so nobody could decide. So there you go, you have an unaccompanied minor living amongst snakes, and also, because they didn't know what to do with these people, the normal procedures were not followed. So normally in Greece, I don't know how it's in Spain, but it is the prosecutor of the court, right, that is supposed to be the, legally the guardian of unaccompanied children. Because they come to Greece with no parents, nobody to take care of them, then it's the prosecutor that is responsible. And there is a procedure whereby the authorities notify the prosecutor about the presence of unaccompanied minors in Greece, but obviously none of that was followed at that time, because since they weren't allowed to apply for asylum, none of the procedures were put in motion. So we have this child alone with the snakes. no sanitary facilities, no food, nothing. This is where we undertook his representation. He was, in the end, transferred to Moria camp, where he was registered as an adult and not as an unaccompanied minor. And this is a systemic problem in Greece, and I know it's also an issue in Spain. That was a problem both of the Greek authorities and Frontex, the EU agency, because they do the registration together. And because he was registered as an adult, though he repeatedly explained that he's a minor, also he's from Uganda, so he speaks English, so he was one of the privileged, let's say, refugees, because he was able to communicate with the authorities. Still, they insisted and they registered him as an adult. So because of this, he was not taken to a special shelter for unaccompanied minors. The prosecutor was not alerted about his presence, so they would offer him the necessary services and protection. So, and because of the 24,000 people in Moria, he had to live in what we call the jungle. It's like the Calais jungle, the Moria jungle, or the olive grove. So that was a makeshift camp, basically set by the refugees because Moria was completely full. So people started just putting tents everywhere under the olive trees around Moria. So this is where SI was living. Of course, also because of his sexual orientation, he was attacked on a daily basis, and he was also exposed to a high risk for COVID. Firstly, because, as I mentioned before, he had asthma, and actually a bit of a serious case of asthma. And secondly, because, well, the completely unhygienic conditions in Moria that you saw before. So, as you can see, the authorities did not take the reasonably, this is standard jargon, standard language from the European Court of Human Rights, the reasonably expected steps to meet their obligation to take charge and protect SI, especially in view of his multiple vulnerabilities. And in the end, his living conditions led to his great physical, emotional, and mental suffering. He developed frequent panic attacks, and his asthma deteriorated dramatically. This case has also been litigated at the European Court of Human Rights, and we are now awaiting the decision. This is where he used to live. This is the olive grove, so this is the jungle. He referred to it as the jungle. Voila. So, what happened to Moria? This is the fire of, well, photos of the fire of the 9th of September, 2020. I mean, we were there when it happened. I'm always wondering, I don't know how, like, did we expect that? It was sort of foreseeable. It was huge, but you would imagine, I think it was only a matter of time before that would happen. And the first thing we heard from the European Commission was no more Morias. We'll get back to that in a bit, but firstly, voila, no more Morias. That's an EU camp. Actually, there's a nice comment that, yeah, no more Morias unless it's the EU's Morias. So here's what we have. And I will get back to the whole analysis of where do we go with the Common European Asylum System. Are there going to be more Morias? How is this going in a bit? But before that, what else do we have? We have the application of the safe third country concept in Greece. I mentioned this in passing in the beginning. So here is how it goes. In June 2021, Greece published legislation, a joint ministerial decision, saying that for 5 nationalities, Syrians, Afghans, Somalis, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis, Turkey is a safe third country. So people should not be applying for asylum in Greece, or if they do apply for asylum in Greece, they don't have to have an interview for the authorities to decide whether they should get international protection or not, because Turkey is safe, and they can go back and apply for asylum in Turkey instead. To be honest, we already had that policy before. In practice, it only applied to Syrian nationals, and it also only applied to people on the Greek islands, on the hotspots. But then in 2021, this policy expanded. Just remember that this happened in June 2021, and you will understand why it's so absurd that it happened exactly at that time in a bit. So, as I mentioned, the applications of the people would not be examined on the merits. There would only be an interview about whether Turkey is a safe third country for them. Obviously, that interview was an interview based on a template. It's always the same questions. You always wonder what is the right answer that can actually convince the authorities that Turkey is not safe for you. People would say they had been pushed back 20 times by the Turkish authorities to their country, and still the decision would say these were single events. So, okay, people would say they were beaten up by the Turkish authorities. The decision would say they will not be beaten up now because they will return with the EU-Turkey statement. People would say they had no access to asylum. They would tell them you didn't try enough. So I can tell you as a lawyer, there is no right answer. Whatever you would say, Turkey is a safer country for you. So people would be rejected with boilerplate decisions. Also, the decisions still are based on old sources. So we have a source about about very many countries from ECRE. It's an organization dealing with these matters. And Greece is using the report that concerns Turkey that was published 4 years ago and not the report that is published now. So based on a paragraph they found in that old report, people had access to asylum. All the latest reports say that people in Turkey don't have access to asylum because the asylum offices do not register their asylum applications. But still the sources are the old ones, no matter how many times we explain to them that there are new sources. Also, the decisions basically copy-paste the Turkish legislation without any review of whether it is applied in practice. And we have a lot of information that not only don't we have access to asylum procedures in Turkey, but also there are a lot of pushbacks. And so, well, we have this issue in Greece. I will explain this later. And human and degrading living conditions. There is also a recent decision by the European Court of Human Rights, which found Turkey responsible for the forced expulsion of a Syrian national, and still this is always ignored in the decisions on whether Turkey is a safe third country for the applicants. But what is more interesting is that already since March 2020, Turkey has not accepted any single readmission from Greece. So although that was known to Greece, still in June 2021, we decided to make it into legislation that Turkey is a safe third country for 5 nationalities. What does this mean? Because it's one of the major issues we have in Greece, and I'm sure we're going to have it in other countries in the future. People have found themselves in a situation of legal limbo. They cannot go anywhere. They cannot go back to their country because they face persecution. Their lives are at risk. But this is not examined because the interview is about whether Turkey is a safe third country, not about whether they can go back to their countries. They cannot move forward to another EU country because they don't have the necessary documents. They cannot go back to Turkey because Turkey does not take them since March 2020. And Greece does not give them documents either. So, because of this situation, people do not have access to what we referred to before as reception conditions. So they don't have access to healthcare, they don't have access to accommodation even in a camp because they're out of the system through no fault of their own, as you can understand, because it's not within their control that this has happened. Still, we are now talking about almost 4 years that Turkey has not received any single person from Greece, and still Greece says that the EU-Turkey statement is applicable and keeps rejecting people on the basis that Turkey is a safe third country. Is there a solution to this? Obviously, someone thought of it when they came up with the idea of the safe third country concept, and what the EU legislation provides, and so does the Greek legislation transposing the EU legislation, is that in these cases, the country, Greece, where the people have arrived, should examine their applications on the merits. So they should say, okay, Turkey does not take anybody back. Now it's my responsibility to actually have a proper asylum interview and ask these people why they cannot return to their country and decide whether to give them asylum or not, instead of continuing this obsession with rejecting them on the basis that they can go to a third country. Greece, however, refused to do so. There is an informal policy to examine the applications on the merits after 1 year. It's absolutely informal. We cannot invoke it as lawyers. If people are rejected and we appeal or we go to the courts, this doesn't exist. It's nowhere written. So basically, the situation continues. Because of this is a very legalistic thing maybe, but there has been now a question referred by the Council of State. This is the Supreme Administrative Court of Greece, to the Court of Justice of the EU, asking for help with the interpretation of the safe third country concept, especially when a country, a so-called safe third country, hasn't received people for so long. We'll see. See. Yes. Yes.
Like other EU member states, are they taking this into account when, like, returning people to Greece based on Dublin?
It seems yes, but not all of them. I understand Germany has taken this into consideration, and obviously, well, you have to take this to the court, so it really depends on what the court will say. But obviously, it's something that we're all very interested in. So we're always thinking if someone goes to another EU country, would then they be able to make this argument that they will find themselves in this situation? So we'll see. Yes, but it's definitely an argument that is raised. In general, so just to add something to this question, as I mentioned before, there is the Dublin regulation, so the other EU member states can send people back to the country of first entry, but because there was a decision against Greece by the European Court of Human Rights many years ago, MSS, a lot of countries still don't return people because it is considered that if they return them, they expose them to inhuman and degrading treatment because of the terrible conditions in Greece. However, still there are countries that do return them, and in some cases Greece says that we are overwhelmed and we cannot take more people back, and in some cases we do take people back. And then there is also, it's also interesting what's happening with recognized refugees that move to other countries. Again, sometimes the courts, especially of Germany, have said, and I think some Dutch courts, they have said that, no, you cannot return them to Greece because even if they have asylum, there is no chance of integration and they would find themselves living in the streets, usually for refugees with more vulnerable profiles, but I will get to that in the presentation as well. So we'll see. But some people do try to move forward exactly because of this. They are in a limbo situation. So QT and others versus Greece is another case of ours. It's actually a family. This is a family from Afghanistan. They were living in Lesvos camp, in the new camp, and they were rejected on the basis that Turkey is a safer country for them. The mother was still pregnant when we undertook the case, and she suffers from hepatitis B. Already in February 2023, the hospital in Lesvos issued a paper saying that she should be urgently transferred to Athens so she could access the necessary exams and treatment. Again, like in the other case, there were no special exams in Lesvos and no proper treatment for these cases. That was necessary not only for her own health, but also to prevent the spread of her illness to the newborn baby. Again, the authorities refused to transfer her because, as I explained, she was in a legal limbo situation. So she was, let's say, nowhere in the papers, the whole family. They had no documents. So the authorities were saying, we're not obliged to transfer them anywhere. They're rejected people. They should actually go away. We have already rejected them. So they could not access the necessary treatment. The father was also diagnosed with PTSD because his family had been brutally killed by the Taliban, and he had various other neurological and physical health problems. And they also had a girl. Back then, she was 1 year old. She was always sick, and she was showing symptoms of aggression, and she was showing aggression and signs of resignation syndrome, so withdrawal syndrome. She didn't want to eat, she didn't want to play, she was sitting in a corner, terrible situation. As I said, none of the members of the family could access healthcare due to the discontinuation of their social security. And what I have forgotten to actually add is that also they did not have access to food, because at some moment the camp authorities decided that all these people that due as a result of their misapplication of the safe third country concept had no papers, they would get no food. So they let them stay in the camp under tolerance because, yeah, well, she was still pregnant, in precarious conditions. They didn't have, as I said, at some moment they didn't have access to food at all. When they had, they didn't have access to proper nutrition, and they stopped receiving any hygiene items, so no cleaning products, no diapers for the kid, and also their cash assistance, because Greece gives cash assistance to asylum seekers, was interrupted. So they were completely destitute, and obviously the answer of the authorities was, but they have been rejected, so why? I mean, we are not obliged to give them any help. We took the case to the European Court of Human Rights. The court granted interim measures within 24 hours, I have to say, since we filed the case. So they ordered Greece to immediately transfer the family to appropriate medical treatment in Athens, to accommodation and living conditions that respect human dignity also in view of their vulnerabilities, and full access to reception conditions. And actually, here they copy-pasted our request, which was really nice. The order was very specific, so they said conditions appropriate to their state of health, including social security, appropriate nutrition, hygiene items, and cash assistance. Eventually, Greece complied, too little, too late, but at least, yes. And here is the biggest shame of the country, I think, and of most EU member states, the pushbacks. I'm not certain how much you know about the pushbacks. It sounds very pop in English. I think in Spanish it would more be like devoluciones en caliente. Yes, also sounds, I don't think it very much summarizes the tragedy in these cases, but anyway, so pushbacks are situations where people that are arriving to Greece are actually, I would say, that's the more formal way of putting it, they are returned without access to any asylum procedure. So they're not allowed to register their application, their asylum application, and obviously they have no access to the asylum procedures, and they're immediately sent back to either their country of origin or to the country they were trying to enter from. This is one way to see this is already a violation of the principle of non-refoulement, so you cannot send people away without examining whether they had any reasons to flee their country or the country they're even living from. But it's much, much even worse than that, which is already bad, because these practices are accompanied by a lot of violence, torture, robbing people of their belongings, and in Greece, at least, they're completely clandestine. So we're talking about people that are masked and armed and no insignia, or you don't, like, we don't even know they're the official authorities, obviously it seems so, but it's a clandestine operation that Greece refuses that it even exists. There are other countries where this is actually state policy, so you legally even you can do more, but Greece says these things don't happen. So, pushbacks are the de facto general policy of the Greek government. As I said, they include, so basically people are kidnapped. They arrive to the Greek territory, they're rounded up by the masked men, or sometimes even men that are not masked, to be honest, and women, and they're forcibly pushed out of Greece, expelled. We also have cases of recognized refugees, people living for years in Greece that have been kidnapped and sent back to Turkey. We also have people that have been well within the Greek territory, so not at the borders. Asylum seekers, registered asylum seekers, but are still have been returned. Again, as I said, Greek authorities deny this is happening. They say this is fake news, and they're always targeting NGOs, journalists, and whoever else is trying to speak out and document these cases. The response by the European Commission has been dangerously inadequate in this case. Just to tell you that the Commission keeps funding Greece, although it's quite clear the money is going to violations of fundamental rights. We have filed a complaint with other organizations on this matter as well. So here, I think this doesn't play like this, but I'm going to do it. Yeah, did it? But still, I need to do it this way. I just wanted to show you a short clip on Pushbacks, because I don't think I can.
Le signe de croix et pris l'enculé, dit vous ne revenez plus, si vous venez la prochaine fois, on va vous tuer, on va vous kill.
These acts are dangerous and they put the people to a much graver risk than they already are.
At its closest point, it's just a few miles to the Turkish coast. Coast Guards patrol these waters every day, but some are accused of illegally pushing back migrants towards Turkey. We've been investigating the stories of some of those who say they've suffered serious human rights abuses at the hands of the Greek authorities. Some asylum seekers managed to film what happened. Using mobile phone technology, we've verified the time and location of the incidents.
No water, nothing. He will die with the baby.
À un moment, ils nous ont demandé pourquoi vous ne prenez pas les visas avant d'entrer. On les a fait comprendre que nous avons fui le pays. Vraiment, la façon de fuir le pays, il n'y avait pas moyen de prendre le visa. Et tout ça, avec la guerre que nous vivons chez nous, les multiples problèmes, la façon de sortir, parce que parfois nous sortons illégal et nous ont insultés. Ils font bien le signe de croix et puis l'enculé dit vous ne revenez plus, si vous venez la prochaine fois, on va vous tuer, on va vous kill.
The Coast Guards create waves to intimidate and to push the dinghies back towards Turkey.
Please!
Some do make it to land. They're abandoned boats on the rocks off Lesvos.
But that doesn't end the danger of being pushed back. We've heard evidence of people who've gotten ashore and been discovered by the Greek authorities, only to be taken back out to sea and pushed in the direction of Turkey without any due process.
Najma is Syrian and fled with her 2 children, one of them a boy aged 12.
شالوه من حضني بطريقة غريبة جدا، يعني كأنه هذا الولد معتقل وهو نايم، شحط من حضني وزتوه على البلم. قامت خلت اجره كان وقع بقلب البحر. انا صحت، لما صحت قام صار يعيط علي، ليش عم تصيحي؟
هذا الخفر اليوناني.
قلت له ابني بده يوقع بالبحر وما بدك انا اصيح. قد ماشي خلص انتم ما بتبغوني انا ادخل على بلدكم، بس مو بهالطريقه.
Greece already hosts around 120,000 refugees, but campaigners say it's breaking international law, forcing others back.
All of these are international obligations that have to be kept by Greece. But also it's EU law that is violated, because the right to asylum, to seek asylum, is also in the EU chapter of fundamental rights.
Since these scenes 6 years ago, sentiment has hardened against migrants in Europe. And the EU is accused of turning a blind eye to abuses because Greece is keeping migrants out. Some boats from the EU's own border agency are even accused of helping with pushbacks. This video shows a ship allegedly blocking migrants last year.
This action is violating of international law.
But now a top EU official says pushbacks defy its core values and must stop.
I think these are violations of our fundamental European values. And when we are protecting our borders, we are protecting our values. And it could not be a contradiction between that. Why are we proud of being European? Why is European Union a place where a lot of people would like to live? It's because of our values, because of that we are defending fundamental rights. And that's why we can't see violations of fundamental rights going on without having a proper response to that.
But the Greek government has rejected the EU Commissioner's remarks.
Allegations affecting Greece are clearly unfounded, rely on footage or testimonials provided for from the country of departure. Numerous cases have been investigated, including by the European Union, and reports have found no evidence of any breach of EU fundamental rights.
Greece has always denied pushbacks are taking place, even with graphic footage like this of shots being fired into the water near a migrant boat. But that policy of denial may not be enough if the EU is serious about ending the abuses on its borders.
We can discuss more as to how much has been done since that video and how much has been done by the European Commission. Because this is an old video, I think it's from 2022, and I decided to show this one to just say that nothing has been done, actually. But first of all, and I'm going to do this a bit fast, the case of MA, just to help you understand how this works. MA is a young man from Syria. His left arm was amputated as a result of an injury during a bombing in Aleppo. He was recognized as a refugee in Greece in April 2020. And in September 2020, he was kidnapped in northern Greece. He was, by a group of armed uniformed men, he was transferred with a group of other men to a makeshift detention facility. He was kept there for a couple of days and then transferred to Evros River, so the river between Greece and Turkey, and forced on a boat to return to Turkey. Some of the men involved had their faces covered, as I mentioned before. Greek authorities are aware of his case, but they refuse to facilitate his return to Greece. We have filed a criminal complaint about 1.5 years ago, which is still pending, but what's very interesting is that he has not been called even to testify, which goes to show the problem with the investigations in Greece into these cases. The case of Gulzar is a case that you can find online. I have included a link as well. It's a Pakistani national who used to live in Greece. He went back to Pakistan to get married. He tried to return with his wife from Turkey back to Greece. But in late February 2020, the president of Turkey said that he would open the borders to Greece. This is also one of the consequences of the externalization policies of the EU. Many people tried to cross from Turkey to Greece. Some of them were actually brought by the Turkish authorities to the borders, and they were trying to cross from the border between Edirne and Kastanjes. So did Gulzar. The Greek authorities, it has been reported, it's documented, they were using tear gas, water cannons, stun grenades, and plastic bullets to prevent the people from crossing, also live ammunition based on other reports. So while he was trying to cross, and about at 10:30 Turkish time, he was shot in the upper torso. He was transferred to a Turkish hospital in Edirne, and there he passed away. There were immediately the Turkish authorities announced that he had been shot by the Greek forces. The Greek authorities said this was fake news. There were investigations led by forensic architecture and also with the contribution of other investigators and journalists saying that the analysis showed that it was highly probable that the shots that killed Gulzar and wounded the other 6 casualties were fired from the Greek side of the border, and the only persons carrying guns from the Greek side of the border, of course, were Greek agents. We filed a criminal complaint. We represent with Equal Rights Beyond Borders, it's another legal organization, his son Mohammed. The preliminary examination was entrusted to the same police directorate that is allegedly involved in the incident. But the prosecutor decided to shelve the complaint, to archive it. We appealed. The appeal was rejected. The prosecutor actually even quoted the Greek authority statements that these allegations were fake news. The widow's testimony was rejected as too emotional. FA, forensic architecture, was discredited. Who are these people? Key witnesses were not interviewed. Witnesses in Turkey, but who had given their information, were not interviewed. No video footage was sought or analyzed, no internal documentation of the authorities, such as rules of engagement, operational plans for the operation in Evros, was sought or analyzed. The Turkish autopsy was completely dismissed, and it was actually making reference to a 5 mm projectile, but again dismissed. And a request by the Turkish prosecutor for cooperation with the Greek authorities was completely ignored. The case is pending at the European Court of Human Rights. Here is a summary, but I don't have to repeat it, of all the issues we see with the investigations in Greece. Just to know that we're supposed to have a specific mechanism, the National Transparency Authority. This is what the Greek authorities have told the European Commission to convince it to continue the funding to Greece. And this mechanism is supposed to be investigating pushbacks. No results yet. There was a report in 2022 that actually focused, as they said in their own report, on the perception the Greek public has of the Greek migration policies. They interviewed no victims. The priests, so the Greek clergy, taxi drivers, and they said they all find the Greek migration policy basically lovely, and pushbacks are not happening because it is not in the mentality of the Greek people, they also said. So it was a great investigation. They also relied on the analysis of the digital material by the same police, but was under investigation. So not a great mechanism, but still good enough for the European Commission to keep giving money. I'm going to pass this fast. There's not a lot of time to speak about the criminalization of migration and human rights defenders, but we can discuss this throughout the questions. But I only want to go here and say, no more Morias. And it would be good to discuss a bit, I don't know how familiar you are with the HIAS reform, so now the Common European Asylum System is changing. But what we see is that the same issues will remain. Still, responsibility lies with the countries of entry. There is a lovely idea, which is the fiction of non-entry. So the idea is that people will be, most of the people will be subjected, well, it depends, there will be border procedures. When you are in the border procedures, it reminds us of the Greek situation, then you are considered as not being in the country, although you are in the country. And obviously, the whole idea is that people should not be able to move forward. So we can imagine already a policy of containment throughout Europe, if not actually detention. Erosion of the safe third country concept. This is very technical, but basically it says that even if a country is not safe for its own nationals, it can still be safe for migrants. And people don't even need to have access to asylum. Effective protection is enough, so just that they can stay and access healthcare and education is enough. And there is a presumption that the country offers effective protection only if the EU has actually entered agreements with this country. So that should be enough for a presumption at least. Insistence on externalization at all costs, but there's a lot of discuss, but just remember the situation at Evros, with Turkey deciding we're opening the borders. There were talks at the beginning about how this new reform is going to be only in the best direction. There is even going to be a fundamental rights monitoring mechanism, so we crazy people from the NGOs don't say they're pushbacks. Well, that's taken out of the text. So now there will be, but not for the border surveillance activities. So the monitoring mechanism will not cover pushbacks and other such violations at the border. Solidarity, there was a lot of talk about solidarity after Moria burned, but it doesn't necessarily mean relocation. It can be just funding, and also it can be funding for projects that deter refugees from coming to Europe. Well, this is very technical. Member states can derogate in cases of instrumentalization. We can discuss this further if you want, but now this is a new term. But other countries and non-state actors are trying to instrumentalize refugees, and as if this is the fault of the refugees, they shouldn't have access to so many safeguards. And these are a few common myths. I can actually leave them here. One of the things that we hear, I think I'm going to finish with that, is we have to be pragmatic. The member states are already not respecting the current Common European Asylum System. So obviously, yes, even if we're lowering the standards, at least we're making them so, but at least like that, the member states will respect them. For me, that's not convincing at all. The more you lower the standards, the more lower the member states will want them to be. But just to say that little has been done in terms of ensuring implementation. We have the Common European Asylum System already. There were a lot of violations. We didn't see a lot of measures taken. We didn't see suspension of funding. We didn't see infringement proceedings, which is another tool that the Commission has. We didn't even see public denouncing of big violations at the borders. And when we speak about the Common European Asylum System, it's worth checking out what is happening with the Italy-Albania agreement, where despite the Common European Asylum System, we have a country making its own arrangement with another country to process asylum applications outside the EU territory. People that come to Europe are not real refugees. I have included some statistics even. I mean, you can see the nationalities, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, very high recognition rate, actually, by the very member states. The EU is overwhelmed. They cannot take more refugees. I mean, we are taking 10%, perhaps 20% with the Ukrainians. And also with the Ukrainian situation, we saw that the EU knew how to actually implement solidarity in practice. So for some refugees, there was a solution, and for some refugees, the member states could collaborate. We need to break the smuggling business model. I mean, whose fault is it that people cannot come through legal pathways? There is not a lot of willingness, and also it's not always accessible. People sometimes they need to use smugglers to get out of their country because they're wanted by their own authorities. So there is, by definition, some persecution cases will have to live illegally. Well, I skipped some, but thank you, and you can ask more questions.
Thank you very much. Ευχαριστώ, Elli, and thank you everyone for paying attention. And I open the floor, of course, to any questions, any comments, any clarifications you may need. I know some of you are master's students. Maybe you're considering taking a research project on that line, so feel free. While you take a second thought, I would like to thank also the Master of International Studies of the University of Barcelona, who has co-organized together with Yamet this session, and where I'm actually a lecturer at the Masters. And I have a question for you, more from the, let's say, pragmatic side of things, from your work at HIAS. How do you, or how do asylum seekers get in touch with you and your organization? Or how do you identify your clients, your, let's say, how does this connection happen? Because obviously the numbers are incredibly high of people in need of legal aid and legal support and other sorts of supports like the ones HIAS offered. So how is this being channeled?
I would say there are different ways for people to find us. We have a system of duty phones that we call them. So we have 3 interpreters, and each one of them has a duty phone. And these numbers are public, because obviously even if my number was public, I wouldn't be able to communicate with the people, because I don't speak their language. So these numbers are public, also the address of the offices, so people can find us this way. There are referrals by other organizations. In Lesvos, there is also a document that mentions how the numbers, and in some cases where organizations feel comfortable, also their address, so people know how to get to these organizations. But I would say mostly by word of mouth. What we see a lot is people that used, like were clients before or still are, they speak to their friends. Sometimes with some nationalities that tend to operate more like a community, so maybe also, Martin, you might be familiar, Congolese and Cameroonians, they would bring the whole community. I remember that. So they would just bring 20 people outside the office. It's not always easy how you choose your cases. I think it's a matter of capacity. If we have capacity, we take whoever comes. If we don't have capacity, we have to pick. This depends on whether also we have the expertise to address their request. I have to say that we have expanded the scope of the fields, let's say, of the types of cases we take, exactly because we see the problems that people face. So we have the asylum procedures. That's how we started at all stages. But then people would come to us saying a friend of theirs is in detention. So we realized there was no legal aid for detention. We started covering detention as well. And then people would say that they're accusing me to be a smuggler, but I was, and this would be my presentation, but I was forced by the smuggler to drive the boat, and I faced so many years of prison. So we expanded in some cases in that direction. So we try to be flexible, but I would say we also look into vulnerability. We're trying to be more strategic in our interventions. So if we see that we need to go against a specific policy, like the safe third country one, we choose cases like that to make sure to just, if we have one intervention that works, this will have a multiplying effect. So yeah, it's some of the criteria we use, and then interpretation limitations.
The mic is coming.
Hi. I had a question. I was wondering what the role of the European courts is in this. I'm not a lawyer, but I was wondering, in these cases that are being brought to the European courts, are they, their resolutions, their rulings, are they only always focused on the specific cases and the measures on those cases, or are they having any kind of impact in the general policies of these countries?
Yeah, that's a great question for a lawyer, almost existential, I would say. It depends. So the cases that I mentioned that concern reception conditions in the former camps that we are representing, right? I'm always wondering the same. You get a conviction, you get a good decision against Greece for these cases, but then the answer of the government will be, but we don't have the same camps anymore. And it's not easy to replicate the decision and say, no, but this should still be the case and it applies to this scenario as well. You have other cases. For instance, lately we've had some great decisions. They're not our cases, but it's decisions about lack of effective investigations into, different scenarios actually, but yes, crimes, let's say, committed by the Greek Coast Guard mostly. And these cases, especially the last one, which is called Al-Khatib versus Greece, again, I clarify it's not our case, this case is describing how it's a case where the Greek authorities, the Greek Coast Guard, shot multiple times a boat with migrants that was arriving to Greece, and one of them was they shot at one person who eventually died. And then there was the decision of the European Court of Human Rights was great because it focused a lot on the applicable legislation. So basically, they were explaining that the rules of engagement in these cases that the Coast Guard followed, there were different sets of rules, and it seemed that they were completely unfamiliar with the newest rules, and they were following previous legislation. So it's something that then you can do something with. You can try to get a bigger change in the legislation as well, or at least in these rules. And then it also spoke a lot about how the investigations into the incident were completely ineffective, and we keep seeing the same issues with the Greek authorities when it comes to how they do this investigation. So this you can take, and you can say they're still applicable in all the other cases, similar cases we have. So these are great decisions. For instance, with Pharmakonisi case, you've heard about the shipwreck last year with more than 400 people, 600 people, some say. These are cases that we are trying to do advocacy for, to say that, see, we still have problems with the investigations, and tell the Greek authorities, see what the European Court of Human Rights said in previous cases of shipwrecks, this is what you should fix, and you're not fixing it. So these cases are great, but as I said, it really depends. Just something for non-lawyers, I won't say, but it's interesting if you want to do something in this field. After you win a case, hopefully, the decision of the European Court of Human Rights goes to the Committee of Ministers, and then you have it goes under supervision of execution. And then NGOs, actually, not necessarily the ones that were representing the case, can file what is called a Rule 9.2 communication. So you can make a report and explain why the problem has not been fixed. So this is for people that are not lawyers but would still want to do documentation. So what we are doing is also that. We're trying to take one case and say, see, the court said this and this and that. Greece has not complied. We try to keep the case open with the Committee of Ministers, so there is more pressure for solutions to be found. So that's, yeah, hope it answers somehow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question, but please, yes. So Marta, and then the lady in glasses. Marta, you first, and then.
I wanted to ask if you do also like litigation within like domestic courts, and what is like, how are domestic courts in Greece? Do they actually investigate or not really?
Yeah, so we do litigation at the domestic courts. It really depends. I mean, obviously with the asylum cases, it's one thing, so you can go to the court as well, but I think you mean more about state crimes, etc. But that's the $1 million question, because this is what I was describing. So we have Gulzar as well was closed like that, like everything was dismissed. The findings, the prosecutor shelved the case at both instances, basically saying that, basing their findings on what the police said and dismissing all other testimonies. So there was that. The other case, the victim has not even been called to testify 1.5 years later. And the authorities say, yeah, it's hard because he's in Turkey. That's what they say for all of these cases. But there is a way. There is also a convention of the Council of Europe for mutual assistance in these cases, and both Greece and Turkey are parties to that, but still it's not applied. So, no, it's not going well. We have another case where people were found. It was a group of people that were found in Lesvos by MSF, Doctors Without Borders, and they were found handcuffed with plastic handcuffs, and some of them had been beaten up. And in that location, also a police radio was found right there. And so that was clearly an attempt for pushback that didn't come to fruition, because actually MSF approached the people. So because this became so big in the news, the prosecutors started their own investigation, so ex officio, and the people went to testify. And then we know there were 2 case files, both of them closed, one of them because of unknown perpetrators, the other one because of insufficient, like there was nothing, there were no elements to show that something had happened. And in none of these cases was any Coast Guard or police that was on duty during that period called to testify. Again, as knowing a bit how these things operate, I would doubt that these operations are anywhere in the books because they're clandestine, but at least the minimum would be to bring someone that was on duty if the people say it was the authorities. But none of this happened. So it just, all of them closed for unknown perpetrators. Oh, yes.
Perfect. Hello. Yes. So many questions because the topic is, and you are really a lot of info, a lot of, so I have to choose one, I have to book one, I guess. So we heard, or no, many times, externalization, Turkey, border, Greece, I'm Italian. So I would like to know, in your opinion, which has to be, okay, what do you think about the circle of externalization, for example, about the resettlement? So, Turkey, this, let's say, delegation of responsibility, and Turkey is always there, and Turkey actually somehow externalized with Cyprus back somehow to Europe, and Cyprus itself is kind of emblematic in the all Europe as, let's say, in political, and as we know, for example, Cyprus is one also of the most affected country, let's say, for refugee and asylum, and also strategic, geographically speaking, together with Greece and Italy. So what do you think about this, and how is untouched Cyprus also as political, this cycle of externalization, these terms? I don't know if it was clear,
Yeah, I have a question. because I'm not that familiar with the situation in Cyprus. How do people just cross from Turkey, or they come in a different way to Cyprus, or is it because you mentioned resettlement?
Yes. So, yes. Basically, what is happening, let's say, is that people cross, I thought you were quite informed more than me, for sure, but there is even, let's say, easiest way, even with flights. Normal flights, let's say, from other part of Africa, they can come, particularly, for example, with the excuse of students. So there are like fake university on top, imagine, that you can enroll in. So somehow you have temporary paper, you arrive to Turkey, and from Turkey you can take a flight, or pay, you arrive to the Turkish, which you cannot call Turkish part of Cyprus, and from them, you say this highway, because I was there in the camp, actually, in the field work. So you say you cross. This is Europe. So from this step on,
yes,
let's say you see, and this is the circle.
But this is the thing. I mean, as I said, I'm not familiar with the situation in Cyprus, but what happened also in Greece in end of February, March 2020, but I. Just briefly touched upon when I spoke about Gulzar's case, is very telling of the situation. If you decide to externalize your obligations to a third country, obviously you create a very particular dynamic and very interesting power relations, because then the third country knows what they have leverage. So this is also what happened during that period. Turkey was not happy with a lot of the decisions of the EU. There was also a situation in Syria, and they decided, well, we're just going to open the borders. And it is true, but from both sides. So it is true that there are testimonies and there is a documentation, and we also have clients that were brought by the Turkish authorities to the borders and pushed to cross. Obviously, the reaction of the Greek authorities was completely unlawful, as you can see. But this is what happens. For me, it's a very dangerous precedent, and we could see back then how easily the third country can actually decide to use it for its own, to further its own interests. So that's why I mean, it is a very dangerous idea to go for externalization, because this is what you create. In Greece, we have an expression, actually, yeah, I think I even translated better in Spanish. Abrir el grifo y cerrar el grifo. Like the Turkey can do it whenever this is what they say. Oh, Turkey decided to open the tap this time, or they're closing it again. So, I mean.
If I can add, is because the concept of resettlement is the sister or the brother of the relocation program. So it's voluntary, but it's on third country. You see, this is part of...
We don't have this at all in Greece. So we don't have resettlement from any country to Greece. So, I mean, all I know is... because I've worked in the past in this, but is Cyprus taking people with resettlement? I know, understood it just.
No, resettlement now is a new measure that the European Commission has started with this new process.
Just, I want to say something on this. This is the problem also with over focus on legal pathways. We obviously in the civil society and human rights lawyers use it a lot. We would rather have people come in through legal pathways than having to risk their lives. Yes. But obviously, this doesn't mean people should not have access to asylum when they use the irregular ways. And you hear the Commission speaking in other countries a lot about resettlement. But, okay, first of all, this doesn't mean that should be the only way. Great if they can also do that. But as a lawyer, I can see thousands of issues with this. Why? Because this is not a legal right. The right to asylum is a right, which means that if you have a right, then you have guarantees, then you have safeguards. This means, at least in a sophisticated system like the system of the EU, this means you can apply. There are specific safeguards for this procedure. If you get rejected, you can appeal. If, again, it depends on the system of every country, you can go to the court, etc. You can have a lawyer, right? In the resettlement, and there is a definition, and the countries have to comply with, who can get international protection. With the resettlement, countries decide if they want to or not. They decide the groups of people. They don't give a reasoned decision. There is no right to a lawyer. There is no right to appeal. There is no right of access to the file. So this is because it's not a right. And very often you hear all these organizations and the state saying this is a possibility, but it's not a right. So this is actually adding to all this erosion of the safeguards that we see in the traditional asylum procedure. So yes, it's resettlement, yes, legal pathways, but let's not forget that people should get access to asylum even if they come on their own and irregularly.
Do you want to ask something? Okay, so one last question from me, taking advantage of my chair role. You've mentioned very briefly, obviously, because there was not enough time for everything you have to share with us, about the criminalization of human rights defender and aid workers. Yesterday, 24 human rights defenders were acquitted after being charged for espionage. How is this being received by the human rights community in Lesvos, in Athens, where you are now? How has this impacted, and how is this happening right now in Greece?
Right, one of my favorite topics. So I had two more, parts in this presentation. One was on criminalization of migrants, one on human rights defenders. We can also speak about the criminalization of migrants if you want later. On human rights defenders. This case, we actually represent one of the people in this case, but he was not in this last trial. So just to tell you briefly, it's a case of 24 persons. It's known, to us at least, as the ERCI case. Actually, Marta, yeah, you've met one of these persons. So it's a group of people, many of them were involved in ERCI, which was a search and rescue organization in Lesvos that were actually in very close collaboration with the Greek Coast Guard, helping people when they would arrive and engaging in search and rescue operations if necessary. And then there was a WhatsApp group with other people that were involved in this first response, let's say, and basically the authorities said, okay, all of these people must be a criminal organization. So they started a case against them, and the thing is, yes, we're very happy about the result yesterday, but there are things that are interesting in this case. So first of all, it's two chapters. One is misdemeanors, the other one is felony. So you have, yesterday's trial was about the misdemeanors. We still have the felonies case file open. We're still waiting to see if there's possibly going to be a trial. The misdemeanors case went as follows. And again, it's very complicated because there are also procedural issues with the defendants, etc. So basically, one of them was a lawyer, which meant the whole case had to go to another court. So anyway, we had the first judgment in the misdemeanors case in the beginning of 2023. So then the prosecutor in the court in Lesvos found that the people the case should close because there were procedural mistakes in the way, first of all, in the summons. So the indictment, when people were called to the trial, the information was not translated to them in a language they could understand. So for all of these people, the case should close because they had not been properly informed, and there was no time to be properly informed because it had expired. So basically, when you get the summons to appear to the court, this stops the expiration, the statute of limitations, the expiration period. But because this was illegal, because it wasn't translated, by the time of the hearing, that had expired. So it never suspended the statute of limitations. And then regarding one of the crimes of like the radio frequency, of like tapping to the radio frequency, that was abolished already in the Greek legislation. Then you had the crime of spying, and there the court found that that was vague, too vague for people to understand what they were being tried for. So for all of this, they annulled, let's say, the indictment, and then the crimes had expired, but for two people, and that's very complicated, but for two people, for most of the people, they were expired. But then, and this is where I want to focus, obviously we celebrated that one as well, but obviously the people wanted to have a proper trial. They didn't want to be, let's say, to get done with it on procedural grounds. They wanted to explain why what they did was not espionage or they were not members of a criminal organization, etc. But we still celebrate it. And here comes the prosecutor of the Supreme Court of Greece and files an annulment application against the decision, against the positive decision. So the case goes to the Supreme Court, and this happens very rarely. You have huge cases of human trafficking, just a very typical example where the defendants didn't get the sentence they should have gotten, and human rights groups were begging the prosecutor of the Supreme Court to file an annulment application because the victims don't have the right to. But in this case, yes, the Office of the Prosecutor filed an annulment application, and then the case went to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court said that basically for those people that hadn't made known to the Greek authorities that they don't speak Greek, then the Greek authorities didn't have an obligation to translate the documents, so they should go back to trial, okay? And that the espionage charge was actually very clear and not vague at all. That's why there was another trial, right, this month, well, in January, and so that was only for 15 people, so the ones for whom the first decision was annulled. So there was another trial, and for the first time, the court got to examine the real case and was there espionage, and anyway, they were all acquitted. So it was really, really great. Ours had been acquitted in the previous one already because he had said he doesn't speak Greek. But we still have the felonies file. So we need to see what will happen with that. As a general comment, what happens with this case in Greece? First of all, we have a very hostile narrative. So NGOs and human rights defenders are always presented as criminals, traitors, Turkish traitors, collaborators of Turkey, anything, or at least being involved in very shady operations. And we have huge press conferences and press releases by the police explaining how they crack down on another network of NGOs that is engaged in smuggling. Then you don't know what they're talking about. Nobody has been called to testify. Nobody knows who they're talking about. Then there is leak to the press, so you can understand more or less what organizations they're photographing through the press release. So this has happened in one press conference in 2002 and another press release in 2021. And the people that seem to be the ones that are presented as involved in these smuggling networks, none of them has been called to testify up to date. It's impressive. And what we also see is that people, there is a new type of criminalization, people that are documenting, so when someone comes to Greece, people are scared they will be pushed back. So they try to contact NGOs and lawyers, and then, and whoever they know, human rights defenders, our numbers are public. So then they call, and then people that receive the call are trying to notify the official authorities and sometimes even the prosecutor, UNHCR, to make sure these people will register their asylum applications, and they follow up on the case to make sure that people will not be pushed back. So they file interim measures at the European Court of Human Rights, etc. Now there are new files that present this activity as facilitation of illegal entry. So if you try to help the people to access asylum, then you try to help them come into the country illegally. So this is the situation we have now. Nice also touch. The annual report of the National Intelligence Services mentions NGOs as one of the main risks for national security in Greece, migration NGOs. So yeah, I would say this is the situation. It doesn't look good, yes.
Okay, not a very positive note to end on, but it's the reality. Unless anyone else has more questions on this very interesting and urgent topic, I wish that you can join me on a big applause for our speaker, Elli Kriona Saranti, for today's presentation, and I thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.